press. Okay, thank you, Leslie. Thank you. This is what we pay Leslie for. All right. We are ready to rock and roll. And we start with the Pledge of Allegiance. So I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the
United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, under God, indivisible, with liberty
and justice for all.
Well done for so many people. All right, and now we're going to do the four-way test. Is it the truth?
Is it
fair to all?
Does it
Build goodwill and better friendships? Is it
beneficial
to all concerned? Yes. All right. It's just so wonderful to do this with all of you. So now I'm going to mute all, and Leslie and myself and our speaker will be unmuted, but when you have a part in the program, and Mark will be unmuted because he'll be doing the prayer today, and if you will unmute yourself if you have a part in the meeting or if there's something that you need to say. All right, but out of respect, I'm going to now mute all.
Ooh, it got so quiet.
I know. Okay. So I'm going to unmute Buddy. So Buddy, I'm asking you to unmute. And let's go down to Mark. I'm sorry, this always takes a moment or two.
I just clicked the unmute button.
Yes.
Beautiful.
And Mark, if you would do the same thing, Mark Friedman, if you would unmute yourself. Okay, great. All right, so we're good to go now. All right, so Leslie, you are up with our patriotic song.
And because I can't resist, I want to point out to those of us in Georgia that although Puerto Rico is only 100 miles wide by about 35 miles north to south, they have 9 Congressional Medal of Honor winners and thousands who have served. So I just want to mention that as we begin our meeting with our patriotic song.
Thank you, Leslie. And Mark, if you would now honor us with saying the prayer.
Let us pray. God of history, we pray for our political leadership. Grant them inspiration and insight. Let them be visionaries to build nations and communities in your image. We pray that they will be stewards dedicated to justice, unafraid to face the challenges of our day, in particular the challenge of this current pandemic. Bless our leaders with dedication and foresight, fortitude and imagination to solve the complex issues that threaten our future. May they lead us to a time when neighbors embrace and all communities thrive, a time when liberty and equality reign supreme. Let the light of wisdom shine brightly in the halls of power, a beacon of hope for every land and every people. And now for this meal, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Blessed art you, O Adonai, our God, sovereign of all, who brings forth bread from the earth. And let us all say, Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Mark. And so now we want to welcome all of our guests from across the water, from Puerto Rico. Welcome. I can't name you all individually, but we are just so happy that you are here with us. District Governor Steve Barnes was going to try to be on the call. I didn't see that he came in. So hearing nothing from Steve, we want to honor our district governor. We want to welcome the president of the San Juan Puerto Rico Club. I present Frank Earl. Welcome. I am so honored to have so many Rotarian dignitaries on this call. We have so many past district governors. Thank you for joining us and thank you for your service. Thank you, Juanita Morris and Margaret Jacobs, for championing this project that brought our clubs together. And I do want to thank Chip Lewis, Kern Baker, and Leslie Mattingly for making this meeting possible and for getting such a great speaker, Buddy Sullivan, who we'll introduce in a minute. Next up is our birthdays. And again, this week, we don't have any birthdays to celebrate, and unless we've forgotten somebody, but I don't know. Or do we have any of our Puerto Rican friends who have a birthday this week? No birthdays. Okay. So next in our agenda is our Rotary Cares piece, where we remember those Rotarians who are undergoing issues in our prayers. And so Jean, if you'd like to take that.
I'm happy to be here and to welcome all of our guests and to let you know that we remember people who are in trouble physically and mentally. I promised that I would not speak a long time today. I just hope that you read the message. I had a wonderful entry from Warren Buffett, and please read that. I've had several people comment already on that. But today we remember especially Mike and Nancy Muldowney. Nancy lost her brother David. We remember Tom Parker, who is continuing in his progress to wellness. We are also remembering Mary Beth Wester as she deals with her own issues of health, as well as her mother's health. And of course, we always remember Francis Allen, June Brown, and Sue Taylor as they deal daily with physical illnesses. And that concludes Rotary Cares, unless someone in our audience has someone that I don't know about. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean, for all you do. And if there is anyone, Frank, in the Puerto Rican Club that you would like us to hold in our hearts and prayers, please let me know. Please let us know.
Okay, I can't think of anybody at the moment, but thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Frank. And I see that our district governor, Steve Barnes, has just joined us. So Steve, I want to welcome you to our first, but not only, joint meeting. All right, so the next portion of our meeting is we all need a little laughter. So Jim Henderson, if you will make us laugh, we would love it.
Well, I'm glad to be here today. It's really nice. I've never told a joke in Puerto Rico before, so this is an opportunity for me. I was afraid I was going to be late today. Some of you may not know, but I've been going over to a retirement community on St. Simon's. I was contacted. They said they love people to come in and entertain them. And you may not know, but I used to play the trumpet years ago in the high school band. And so I got my trumpet out and kind of brushed up my skills. And today was my first day of going over and playing the trumpet for some of the people at this retirement home. And after I finished, there was one lady on the front row that was obviously ill. I mean, she had a runny nose and looked like she had a fever. She just didn't feel good at all. So when I was leaving, I said, well, I hope you feel better soon. And she looked at me and she looked at my trumpet and then she looked me right in the eye and said, yeah, I hope you get better too. That's not the joke. You know, a lot of people, we have a lot of older people that live on St. Simon's Island, and people are always looking to kind of pair up. So these two old men had gotten together, and this old man said to his other old man friend, is it true you're getting married? And the guy said, yep, it sure is. And he said, well, have I ever met her? And he said, no, I don't think so. She said, well, is she attractive? And, well, no, not really. Well, can she cook? And the guy said, well, no, I don't even think she can boil an egg. Well, she must be rich then. And she said, no, she's got less money than I do. Well, she must be good in bed then, right? And the guy said, well, to be honest, I hadn't found that out yet. And he said, well, my God, man, why are you marrying her? And the old man looked at him and said, she can still drive at night. And ain't it the truth?
Ain't it the truth? Thank you, Jim. So now it's the portion in our program where we have happy dollars. So anybody that's happy puts a dollar in the cart. Of course, you know, we're on the honor system since we don't have a physical cup right now. But who's happy today?
I'm happy.
Good, Chip. Why are you happy?
I'm happy because I'm at my second San Juan Rotary Club meeting. First one was in person, the second one is virtual. So thanks and welcome to all the San Juan Puerto Rican Rotarians.
Thank you.
I'm
Right.
happy.
Thank you.
Hi, Janice.
I'm happy because this weekend, my 16-year-old grandson leaves from New Jersey and heads to San Francisco because he is currently, at his age, ranked as one of the top 5 ballerinas in the United States. And he has a full scholarship to the San Francisco Ballet. And they'll educate him to make sure he gets his high school diploma. But meanwhile, it'll be an intensive studying with the San Francisco Ballet, whom he hopes to join their ballet troupe in a couple of years. So I'm very proud of him.
That's wonderful.
That's very cool.
That's worth $5, Janice, by the way. All right. Who else is happy?
I'm happy. We just celebrated our Jewish New Year. Lashana Tova, Happy New Year. 5,781.
Wow.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Happy.
Hi, Linda.
Hello, how are you? I'm ecstatic because I actually managed to get my absentee ballot completed and Bob's too. He and I completed our ballots and they went into the drop box yesterday. So now I do not have to think about that anymore. I discovered there's actually a link where we can check and track it, just like a FedEx package or something. And I doubt with this group very much that it's necessary to remind you and encourage you to vote. But whether it's in person, early, or by absentee ballot, of course, it's very important to vote. So I'm very happy about that.
Excellent, Linda. Good
One
job.
question. I'd like to know, when will that ballot be counted?
It won't be counted until every other ballot on election eve. The ballots go in, and the absentee ballots there's permission starting, I don't know, maybe a week before the election to open the ballots so that they can be put in a stack and ready to be tabulated. But the early votes, the in-person votes, and the absentee votes that have been received all get counted at the same time on the night of the election. Any ballots that arrive, I think it's within 3 days after the election, if they were postmarked on or before election day, will be counted as well.
Is there an advantage to voting early in person?
Well, I think everybody has to kind of make their own decision about that. That compared to voting on election day probably means you would have a shorter line and not have to wait as long. I found the absentee ballot process to be very simple and easy, and I just put it in the drop box at the Board of Elections, and that took me a grand total of maybe an hour, counting travel time back and forth. So I found that to be the way that made sense to me, but different people have different priorities.
Can you share the link with us?
Beg your pardon?
Can you share the link with us?
Yes, I'll be glad to. I will send it to, I will send it, now it's for Georgia, so I don't know what happens if you're in San Juan, but you probably have a process there as well, but I'll share the link I have with Beverly and she can share it.
Thank you.
Okay.
I think it is different in San Juan.
I would think so.
We can only do absentee ballots if we're off island, is my understanding. So we need to do the early voting. If you're over 60, you get to do that. I did it in the primary. It's pretty convenient. No lines, less people.
Right.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else happy? I know you're out there. No? Okay. Moving forward. It's now time for our announcements. And T, if you'd like to start with yours.
Absolutely. Just want to alert our St. Simon's Rotarians to be on the lookout for an email that's going to be coming out this afternoon. We're going to be handling our charitable outreach a little bit different this year, and also our invoicing for the coming quarter. So I don't want to go into details here, but please look through your email, and then if there are any questions, feel free to give me a buzz.
Thank you, T. As you all know, the hybrid luncheons are starting next week on October 6th. We had an initial email go out that is kind of it's just a yes/no email, so I can get a general idea of what we're thinking for RSVPs for CPOMs. We're going to be doing things a little bit differently, and so there's going to be a second email that comes out with the specifics of the meeting and confirming the time, giving you an idea of what the luncheon is going to be. So do look for that. Do look for that email. Cart buckets. We need your donations, especially now. So please continue to give. Don't forget your Paul Harris double points. Contact John Kilgallen if you have any questions. Are there any other announcements then that anyone has?
Beverly,
yes.
The email did go out with the choices on whether you want to do Zoom meetings or
yes.
in person.
Right.
We've already gotten 39 responses to
Excellent.
that, which is pretty amazing because they only went out about an hour ago. So people are responding to it, and
Good.
we will close the responses at noon on Friday. That's the deadline. If you don't make a response by then, the assumption will be that you're going to be staying with the Zoom meetings. But it's out there. It takes you all of 15 seconds to, it's only the one question on the survey. Send it back and we'll be able to tabulate those.
Right. Thank you.
What kind of lunch?
It's going to be boxed lunches. There'll be 2 different main choices and then 1 vegetarian, but it will be first come, first serve. And I'll detail that in the email. We're not doing a buffet for, we want to keep these meetings as safe as possible.
Can you switch between?
We would like to get a general sense of those who do not feel comfortable meeting in-house at all, because there are some of us who, there are some members who have health issues and they're not ready to come back yet. But you will be able to send me an email and say, I want to come, or I'm not going to come and I'm going to do Zoom. And that's what the second email will detail. Okay, so yes, you can join us. We're going to be billed separately for lunches, but again, all that's going to be detailed in the email. And once you get the email, if you have any questions, call me, email me, send me a smoke signal. Okay, but yes, Gary. All right. So now we're if there's no more questions or announcements from anyone, we're going to dive into our program. And so, Kern, if you will introduce our speaker, historian Buddy Sullivan.
Thank you, Beverly. We are honored and excited to have Buddy Sullivan with us today. He's a native of the Golden Isles, and for our friends in Puerto Rico, you're going to hear a little bit about, you know, the Golden Isles and who we are, and more importantly, where the Golden Isles are located. He's been writing, researching for 35 years. He's written 30 books and monographs. He's in frequent demand, and we are very, very happy to have him with us today. He's on our screen right now. Buddy, welcome.
Thank you. I am delighted to be here, and it's my honor to be involved in such a wonderful organization as Rotary International, and especially to reconnect with some of my St. Simon's friends, as well as our friends from San Juan. So this is quite a treat for me personally. I was invited to speak to give you an overview, I guess, of our area, to perhaps maybe refresh the memories of our local members, but also to introduce coastal Georgia, or specifically the Golden Isles of the coast of Georgia, to our friends from San Juan. And so one of the interesting things about, you're looking now at a view, this is a coastal sunset. This is a typical scene near my home. I can look out my window right now and get a scene like this almost every day. But this is a tidal creek, and that is those are marsh hammocks, what we call hammocks. In the background, they're little small islands, but that's typical of the ecosystem of our part of the United States. This is the southeastern ecosystem with salt marshes and tidal rivers and creeks, and we have a tidal rise and fall. A difference from usually an average tide will be about 7 to 7.5 feet, and a spring tide on say a full moon may go to 9.5 feet. So our tidal range is quite high because of our position on the southeastern coastline, and the tidal ranges vary throughout the eastern United States on the eastern seaboard, but Georgia has one of the greatest variations in tides of any other area because of its positioning so far removed from the Gulf Stream, which flows from the Caribbean northward into the North Atlantic along the eastern seaboard. Next slide, please, Leslie. The coast of Georgia is made up of a chain of islands. These are called barrier islands. We call them barrier islands because they sort of serve as buffers or barriers against tropical storms and hurricanes coming in from the sea, and they protect the mainland. And there are 8 major islands, and you can see there toward the bottom of the image, you will see St. Simon's and the city of Brunswick on the mainland. Brunswick is the main city in what we call Glenn County, Georgia. And then St. Simon's is just offshore, connected by a bridge to the mainland, to Brunswick. At the top of the map, you'll see Savannah. Savannah is probably one of the best known cities in the United States. It's not a large city per se, but it's a city of history and culture and natural beauty and good people. And Savannah is the first place that people think of when they come to coastal Georgia. Of course, the capital of Georgia is Atlanta. Atlanta is, the last time I checked, Atlanta is the 8th largest city in the United States from the standpoint of population. And it is also has the world's busiest airport. I think I'm still correct in saying that, the Atlanta International Airport.
And Buddy, I'm going to interrupt you there
Capital
because
of Georgia.
so often people think that Atlanta is close to us, but they are 450 miles away. So it's a long distance.
Atlanta from our area where we live is about a 5-hour drive unless you really get in a hurry. And so I've done it in 4:15, but you know, I was rushing it. But anyway, the islands make up the coast. Next slide, Leslie. And so our coast, just a little bit of an overview. You're looking at a scene of a salt marsh ecosystem. This is very typical of the southeastern coastline. And Georgia has more tidal salt marsh than any other state on the eastern seaboard of the United States. Georgia has a relatively short coastline, only about 100 miles, but it has more tidal salt marsh, such as you're looking at there, than any other state because of the barrier islands that protect the marshes, and also because the marshes in Georgia are legally by law and regulation protected from development. So our marsh system is very pristine and very protected and very advanced. And you're looking at the typical cordgrass. This is called smooth cordgrass, known as Spartina alterniflora. And this is the most common marsh. And these marshes provide nutrients for organisms in the water. Shellfish, crabs, shrimp, clams, oysters, all depend on these salt marshes for their nutrients, for their growth and development. Next slide. The barrier island beaches vary in ecological characteristics. This is what we call a barrier island beach, which is subject to erosion. This is, for example, on Blackbeard Island, north of St. Simon's Island, where the beach is subject to erosion, where you see a tree cover has been eroded over the years, over many years, but this is purely natural. This is a purely natural process where the beaches are shifting and changing. They're very dynamic. The beaches on the coast are, because of the currents and the winds and the tides, create this movement of beaches and changing characteristics. But the beaches are quite natural on the coast of Georgia. And I might add, I didn't mention this earlier, but there are 8 major islands on the Georgia coast. St. Simon's is only one of 3 that are accessible by causeway or by bridges. The others being Jekyll Island, and the third one being Tybee Island near Savannah. We could count Sea Island, that's adjacent to St. Simon's, so that would be a 4th because it's also a separate island. Okay, next slide. The characteristic upland vegetation of Georgia, of the coast of Georgia, is the live oak, Quercus virginiana. This is the natural hardwood live oak that grows in abundance on the coast, on all the islands and on the adjacent mainland. Very beautiful tree with a very low canopy, but long spreading arching branches such as you see in the image there. And the oak trees are the signature of the upland mainland, and the islands such as the marshes are the signature of the wetlands of the coast. Okay, next. The exploration of coastal Georgia and of the Golden Isles really goes back to just a few years after the accidental discovery of this part of the world by Christopher Columbus. This was, well, of course, in 1492, and it was only 30 some odd years later that Spanish explorers began looking and investigating what became the coast of Georgia, Florida, and the Carolinas. Next slide. And there were missions along the coast. The Spanish began to settle in Florida and set up a provincial capital at the new city of St. Augustine, and began to branch out and establish Franciscan missions along the coast from what is now the area around Savannah southward to St. Augustine. And there were a couple of missions on St. Simon's Island, on the north end and the south end of the island. Just about all of the islands had missions, Franciscan missions, ministering to the local native Indian population, Christianizing them as well as teaching them European ways. And so the missions were in evidence in Georgia, of what is now Georgia, from about 1575 until about 1685. So a little over 100 years, a little over a century, the Spanish missions were prevalent along this coast long before the area was settled by any other colonists. Next slide. The conceptual drawing here, the watercolor, shows you what a typical Spanish mission would have probably looked like based on the archival records that have survived and the descriptions provided by some of the participants in the missions. With the over toward the right, you have the church that would have been the first thing to be built, very simply built out of wood and thatched roof. There were animals brought, corrals were built. The priests lived in small, simple residences. And you see some of the interaction with the Native American people there at the bottom of the image to introduce them to the ways of the Spanish culture. Next slide. The archaeological work that has gone on these missions has been quite extensive. You're looking at some of the artifacts that have been found on the sites of the old Franciscan missions, religious crosses and medallions, medals. Very valuable objects have been uncovered several feet below the surface of the ground by professional archaeologists. So many of these artifacts have been preserved and are on public display in various museums and places around the southeastern coastline. Next slide. About 30 years ago, the Spanish missions, the priests who were martyred as a result of attacks by Native American populations, several were slain and murdered. And you see here a scene from the consecration of the site of the mission at St. Catherine's Island, or the Mission de Santa Catalina. And the mission was consecrated, and the 5 murdered priests were placed for martyrdom, for sainthood, a process that is still going on. They have been, as many of you know that are familiar with the Catholic investigative processes and the research processes, the canonization process can be very convoluted and very long and drawn out. And so the 5 priests were put up for martyrdom, I believe in 1984 and 1985. And that process has still not been, the results have not yet been released by the Vatican. And so, but we're hopeful that sometime before too much longer, we'll get some word on that process. Very interesting process, though, that is ongoing. Okay, next slide. Finally, in the year 1733, after about 200 plus years of activity on what is now the coast of Georgia, the colony of Georgia was founded by the English. The English founded Georgia as the 13th English colony in North America. And Georgia was founded by General James Edward Oglethorpe, a leader of the colonists who came from England, and founded what you're looking at is a survey plat of the new town of Savannah on the Savannah River. The river was named first, and the town was named after the Savannah River, which is an Indian name in origin. So Savannah was the first town of Georgia, and so it was established in 1733. The next town to be founded was called Augusta, which is, of course, familiar to many of you as the present home of the Masters Golf Tournament. Augusta is a very old city in Georgia, and coincidentally, Atlanta was not started, the major city of Georgia. Atlanta was not founded until 1845. So Atlanta is sort of the baby of the larger cities of Georgia because it's relatively new. Okay, next slide. On St. Simons, the town of Frederica was established. St. Simons, as we've talked about, was one of the major islands, and the English wanted to have a town and fortification south of Savannah to protect the colony from incursions by the Spanish. Now, this was at a time when England and Spain were at difficulties with each other, largely over a commercial rivalry rather than military. It was a commercial rivalry based on Caribbean trade and colonial trade in the Caribbean basin, including Puerto Rico. And so Frederica was established by Oglethorpe and the English colonists in 1736, and a fort was built and a town was established, as you can see in the drawing, the sketch there of the layout of the town. Next slide. And England and Spain did actually go to war in 1740. And Spain actually attacked St. Simon's Island in 1742, and there were military operations on the island. The Spanish hoped to capture Frederica and capture St. Simon's and therefore be a threat to the provincial capital at Savannah. But the Spanish were defeated at a skirmish at a place that came to be known as Bloody Marsh. And here you see a conception of the Battle of Bloody Marsh on St. Simon's Island, in which a small force of English and Scotsmen defeated a contingent of Spanish invaders who had come up from St. Augustine to attack Frederica. And based on this outcome, the Spanish retreated, and peace was eventually signed several years later, and Georgia was free from further invasion from Spain. Next slide. St. Simon's itself became a very large agricultural community. St. Simon's, as you can see in this map, dated about 1860, was home to a large scattering of farm tracts, plantations by different families who owned these lands. Of course, slavery at that time was the engine of labor. Slavery was, of course, one of the denominators which caused the Civil War. And these plantations were dependent on slave labor. They produced large amounts of cotton. Cotton was the money crop. There was rice grown on the mainland along the freshwater river systems, but on the islands themselves, such as St. Simon's and Sapelo and Jekyll, cotton was the primary crop that was grown for commercial purposes. At the upper left, you see the town of Brunswick on the mainland. Brunswick was a small town originally, very small in population. The focus of energy and population in this area was at St. Simon's Island. Of course, long before a bridge was built to St. Simon's, and it was accessible only by boat. You could only get to St. Simon's by boat from Brunswick or one of the other islands. Next slide.
Buddy, could I interrupt you just
Sure.
briefly? Because they're going to see in the news in the coming weeks the dismantling of the Golden Ray, the major shipping cargo ship that turned over in our sound. That is right here, and you'll see that on the news.
That's right. Very good point. Yeah, this is a cargo ship that accidentally capsized back last year, over a year ago, September of 2019, right in the main channel, the shipping channel, between Jekyll Island at the left and then St. Simons. And it has been a source of endless conversation, fascination, whatever, among locals around here for over a year now, but they are in the process of dismantling the ship to remove it. It could not be salvaged, and they're going to remove it from the harbor, and so it will no longer be an obstacle to the shipping that comes in and out of the Brunswick port. Okay, next slide.
Let's see here. There we go.
This part of coastal Georgia was agriculturally very significant. The coastal counties of Georgia, as well as the islands, produced large amounts of cotton, rice, sugarcane, and other crops, and made this section of the southeastern coast one of the wealthiest economically of any section of the southern United States. Next slide. Rice cultivation was cultivated. Rice was grown on the mainland, not on the islands, but rather near freshwater rivers where they could use the fresh water to irrigate the fields, and they used the tidal systems from the nearby sea to promote the flooding and irrigation of the fields to allow water in and out of the fields. And you can see in the image there, this is a contemporary sketch of a typical tidewater rice plantation in coastal Georgia. And most of the rice grown in the world in the 1840s, 50s, and 60s was grown in South Carolina and Georgia. Those two states led the world in the production and shipping of rice more than any other part of the world. Long story short, no longer rice is grown here. Very little cotton is grown here anymore. These are all agricultural commodities that are cultivated in other parts of the South in the United States. And so these are all bygone eras, as you can say, that have come and gone. Next slide. As I said, slave labor provided the economic energy behind these plantations for about 100 years in Georgia. Slavery was legalized. One of the interesting things, when Georgia was founded as a colony, the trustees of the colony made slavery illegal. Slavery was not legalized in Georgia until about 25 or 30 years after the founding of the colony, and so, which is one of the unique things about Georgia. And of course, slavery ended with the Lincoln Emancipation Proclamation, and of course, the outcome of the war between the states. Next slide.
Here's what I found.
After the war was over, we have the turn from agriculture to forestry with the change of economic dynamics and the closure of most of the plantations. Many people, blacks and whites alike, turned to the forest where pine trees were growing. And there was a great demand for Georgia lumber after the war was over. And so here you see a typical scene, probably around 1875 or so, where pine timber is being hauled out of the woods. Next slide. And St. Simons and Darien and Brunswick and Savannah were among the leading centers in the United States for the processing of pine timber into lumber. And ships came, as you see in this image, ships came from all over the world to load Georgia pine timber from the St. Simons mills. They're pictured in the background. For you locals, of course, the St. Simons mills were located precisely on the present-day Epworth by the Sea campus. And so the ships would come in and to tie up at the docks there at the mills and load timber and lumber for distribution internationally and to the U.S. Northeast. Next slide. Brunswick itself became quite an important port, and as well as St. Simons. You can see a picture here. The photograph shows just huge amounts of lumber waiting to be loaded, and the shipping there at the docks waiting to take it on, to take to foreign ports. Most of the lumber internationally went to Europe, to Great Britain, to Scandinavia, to Germany, to the Mediterranean area, Italy. And so, but a great deal of it also went to places like parts of South America, and even as far away as India. Next slide. This era in the years 1870s to early 1900s saw a great growth of Brunswick, mainly because of its importance as a rail center and as a seaport. And what you're looking at here is the famous Oglethorpe Hotel, built on Newcastle Street near the waterfront in Brunswick, built about 1882, 1885. And it was the most lavish hotel anywhere on the southern coast, say between Charleston and Jacksonville. It was a very integral part of the local community, and the famous Jekyll Island Club was established about the same time as the hotel was built. And so many of America's wealthiest people who were members of the Jekyll Island Club would come to Brunswick and stay at the Oglethorpe Hotel that you see there. This was a landmark for a very long time. It was eventually, it fell into great stages of disrepair, and it was eventually torn down and dismantled in the late 1950s. And so it is no longer there, unfortunately, but even for people still living today, it was a very vivid part of their early lives, their livelihoods and culture of Brunswick and the Golden Isles. Next slide. Brunswick began to grow as an industrial center. What you see here is a photograph of the Hercules powder plant in Brunswick. Hercules, based in Delaware, in Wilmington, Delaware, opened up a plant in Brunswick in the 1920s for the processing of pine stumps from the cut pine trees and processed into various products, including gunpowder, as well as various products such as turpentine and tar and rosin and that sort of thing. And Hercules became a very important industry. Shortly after that, the paper and pulp mills were opened in Georgia, on the Georgia coast, and where the processes of pine timber were cut or processed into paper and paper products. And these became very large industries, which employed thousands of people along the coast. Next slide. About the same time, in the early 1900s, the commercial fishing industry became very integral to the economy of the Golden Isles and the coast of Georgia and the Carolinas. Oyster vessels would gather oysters in the winter, and then here you see a typical shrimp boat trawling its nets behind as they go offshore to catch shrimp. The shrimping industry in Georgia actually for many years was a very important part of the local economy, and Georgia was among the national leaders in the processing and harvesting of shrimp and associated other seafoods. And Brunswick really for a number of years was known as the seafood processing capital of the world because of the number of processing plants for shrimp and crabs and whatnot to distribute seafood products all over the United States as well as overseas. Next slide. Many people are still employed in the commercial fishing industry, in shrimping and crabbing and oystering. However, the industry has really gone way down in the last 25 to 30 years because of competition from foreign imported shrimp from Central and South America. Even the Far East has greatly undercut the domestic shrimp industry, and domestic prices have been unable to compete with the foreign prices. And so as an unfortunate consequence, it has forced many second and third generation shrimp fishermen out of the industry to seek new livelihoods. So the shrimp fleet in Georgia, for example, is way down compared now to what it would have been in the peak of the years in the 1970s. Okay, next slide. In World War II, Brunswick was an important center for shipbuilding. the Golden Isles made a vast and important contribution to the effort in the Second World War, to the national effort industrially. And ships called Liberty ships were built in Brunswick on the Brunswick River near the present bridge. And these Liberty ships were prefabricated vessels that could be constructed very quickly, often in a matter of weeks. These were about 600-foot vessels, 700 feet, that were specially designed to be constructed rapidly. And they were used, built in the hundreds around the United States to transport military equipment to Europe and the Pacific War, troops, military equipment, and they were very, very important to the war effort in the United States effort. Brunswick was the leading shipbuilding yard in the United States. Brunswick built more Liberty ships than any other city on the Atlantic, Gulf, or Pacific coasts. And this is testimony to the importance of this industry. I believe at one time, the Brunswick shipyard during the peak of its activity in 1943 employed about 16,000 people, which was about double the population of Brunswick at that time. So that gives you an idea of the scope of the Liberty ships and how quickly they were built and how important they were. Next slide. Here's a photograph of a Liberty ship going down the ways after just being launched. As I said, 99 ships were built in Brunswick, 85 of which were Liberty ships, such as you see here. 14 other ships were somewhat smaller, but they were also cargo carrying vessels. And so the Brunswick shipyards was an active place for many years. This was a time when so many young men were in the Navy and the Army, the Air Force, the Marines, the Coast Guard, and the military services, fighting wars on two fronts, the two ocean war. So most of the employees of these shipyards were women and older men who were too old for military service. So the famous term Rosie the Riveter came out of these shipbuilding yards around the United States because there were so many women employed in the laborious jobs of building these ships. Okay, next slide. Almost down to the end of the program. This is the Sydney Lanier Bridge, and this is exactly where the shipyards were located in the 1940s. The Brunswick shipyards right here. But I like this picture because it's sort of it captures the history of Brunswick while also capturing the modern aspects of Brunswick. And I believe it was mentioned earlier before the program started that Brunswick, St. Simons, and the Golden Isles are very important from the standpoint of tourism and recreation, and also as retirement communities, semi-retirement and seasonal communities. And so this beautiful bridge was built in the 1990s and named for Sidney Lanier, Georgia's poet laureate, who wrote the famous poem, The Marshes of Glen, one of the most famous poems in American literature. And so the bridge there is an important conveyor for traffic along the US 17 corridor along the coast of Georgia. But it is somewhat symbolic of the importance of Brunswick as a seaport that has grown over the years. Brunswick is now a major seaport from the standpoint of the automotive industry. I believe Georgia seaports between Savannah and Brunswick are the third leading bulk cargo carrying seaports in the United States now. That's how important Savannah and Brunswick have become. And most of the commercial traffic in Brunswick is for the transport in and out of automobiles that have been manufactured in the United States or being imported in from other countries into the United States. And that is the type of ship that capsized a year or so ago in the St. Simons Harbor. That was a cargo carrying vessel, and it was outbound, and it had something like 4,000 new automobiles on it when it capsized. So you can imagine what a terrible loss that was from the standpoints of cost. But Brunswick is a very important seaport now, and it's one of the leading ports on the Atlantic coast. and probably the most important aspect, perhaps next to tourism, to the local economy is the Georgia Ports Authority operations at Brunswick. I believe we have one more slide. I'll close this out with just sort of like you're looking into the sunset there over the Brunswick Harbor, St. Simon's Harbor, St. Simon's Sound, as the ship goes in from the sea. And it's sort of evocative of the natural beauty and also the economic importance of our area. And it's sort of the scenes that we all love and walk down on the St. Simon's Pier and take a look at. And we never take these things for granted. We know we live in a special part of the world here in the Golden Isles, and it is something we never tire of looking at. The salt marshes and our rivers and waterway systems and the ships coming in and out, and it's a special place. And so that concludes the program.
Does anyone have any questions for Buddy?
I'd like to congratulate Buddy. It's particularly significant to me what you said about the Liberty ships, because my father served as a radio operator. And the one thing people may or may not know is that the Liberty ships were made for the Lend-Lease program to take things to Great Britain. And without that program having been successful, the Second World War would not have had the ending it had for us.
Very true. Good.
So I thank you for adding to my knowledge about where Liberty ships were made.
This area was very important, constructed more Liberty ships than anywhere else.
Wow, thank you again.
Are there any Liberty ships still around? Did any of them survive?
My understanding is that there are two. I believe there's one on the Pacific coast, maybe they're no longer operating, but they're museum ships. I know there's one in Philadelphia. Yeah. The one in Philadelphia is a Liberty ship, and I believe there's one maybe at Bremerton, Washington, near the naval base there. But
okay, yeah.
Philadelphia.
There is some in California near Benicia.
Okay, right. I didn't know about that one, but there are not many. There's just a handful.
I just would like to mention that I think some of the Liberty ships didn't last very long after their manufacture here because of the German U-boats that set out to sink them.
Yes,
and a great, the museum, the World War II museum dedicated to that era is such a rich resource of information.
Yes, as you point out, many of the ships were torpedoed in their transit from the United States over to the United Kingdom, transporting troops and materiel of war. Many ships were lost before the Navy of the U.S. and the Royal Navies finally got the U-boat threat under control and eliminated that threat. But until they did, there were a lot of ships lost. That's why the story, as was pointed out by Kern a moment ago, the story of the war is the fact that the United States was able to just simply out-manufacture. Germany was trying to sink as many ships as they could, thinking they could bring the United States to its knees and sue for peace, but the United States just kept building more ships and more planes and more tanks and more everything. And of course, the Axis powers just could not compete with that. And so that brought about a successful conclusion to the largest war in history.
Buddy, great presentation. I thought it might be interesting for our Puerto Rican friends if you could elaborate a little bit on Jekyll Island and some of the items of history of its development in the 1800s and some of the interesting things that happened there.
Yes, okay. Jekyll Island you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, Jekyll Island was one of the islands that was, of course, colonized by the English. It became a cotton plantation after the American Revolution. And then I did allude to one of the pictures that the Jekyll Island Club was formed in the 1880s, formed of the leading financiers, capitalists, corporate executives, that sort of thing in the United States. And they formed an exclusive private club on Jekyll Island. And they built structures. They built a large clubhouse and individual houses. And most of those are still there. And they're in a National Historic District. And many of them are open for tours to the public. and it is a very, very historic place. Jekyll is unique in that it is one of several islands on the Georgia coast. There you go, there's the Jekyll Island Club, which was the former meeting house of the famous millionaire village, but is now a hotel, and it's very popular with the tourism in the area. But Jekyll eventually was sold by the club to the state of Georgia right after World War II. And so now Jekyll is a state resort managed by the state of Georgia. And it is an integral part of our local Golden Isles history and culture and economy.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Buddy?
Well, this has been a pleasure. Thank you for having me, and I'm honored that I was invited to be a part of two wonderful groups from San Juan and, of course, from the Golden Isles. Thank you.
I love having
buddy.
another Sullivan here, buddy.
My pleasure.
And so, thank you everyone who joined our meeting. This will conclude our meeting. We can't wait until October 20th when Puerto Rico San Juan Club will host the meeting, and we want to learn all about you. So thank you so much, everyone. Go out there and be good Rotarians this week.
Thanks so much for everything. Have a good day.
Great
Bye.
job.
Great meeting.